Welcome everyone to AURI Connects Fields of Innovation, part of AURI Connects monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. I'm Dan Skogan, AURI's Director of Industry and Government Relations, and your host for Fields of Innovation. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute in Minnesota. Fields of Innovation is focused on bringing together Minnesota's regional ag and food value chains to build capacity and successfully commercialize new and emerging crops. Events will focus on highlighting new crops, examining marketing opportunities for emerging crops, and highlighting new technologies in existing crops. Remember that this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Also remember, participants are muted, but you can ask questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. Today we will discover what is new with wheat in a program that we're calling Breeding Wheat That's Easier to Eat, a new future for an old crop. We will hear from Dr. George Honor. Dr. Honor is an assistant professor of cereal chemistry and technology and also chair for the General Mills Endowed Professorship in Cereal Chemistry and Technology in the Department of Food Science and Nutrition at the University of Minnesota. He is currently the president of the Minnesota section of the Institute of Food Technology. Dr. Honor is also part of the Forever Green initiative, actively working on environmentally friendly and sustainable crops. We will also hear today from Scott Swenson. Scott lives on a fourth-generation farm near Elbow Lake, Minnesota, where he and his wife raised 3 sons. He became active in the wheat associations in an effort to increase the economic viability of this crop, hoping through a variety of avenues to make wheat revenue analogous to soybeans and corn. Scott has a Bachelor of Science degree in agricultural engineering from the University of Minnesota. He's been an engineer for Deere & Company. He's worked on the trading floor of the Minneapolis Grain Exchange and has been a farmer in Grant County since 1984. His experience within the Wheat Association includes being a director on several boards, including National Wheat Foundation, Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council, Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers, the National Association of Wheat Growers, NAWG-USW Joint Biotech Committee. Also today, we will be hearing from 3 farm daughters, including co-owners Molly Ficocello, Paul Sproul, and Grace Lunsky. 3 Farm Daughters is a North Dakota-based food company that understands the importance of nourishing themselves and their families with purposeful foods. While not willing to compromise on taste and texture, they found that this can often be hard to do, especially with young children. That's when 3 Farm Daughters, a family-owned business, set their mission to produce and deliver better-for-you food products that met that exact criteria. Holding the highest standards when selecting what goes into their products, 3 Farm Daughters uses their vast ag background to source ingredients and varieties that provide better nutritional values that consumers demand. The great taste and texture we all know and love, and all while doing so with clean and simple ingredient legends. 3 Farm Daughters' current products include pasta and flour that are high in fiber, lower in calories, and more protein than traditional pastas and flour, all while being made from one single ingredient, wheat. And finally, moderating for us today will be Harold Stanislawski. Harold is a business development director for AURI with over 30 years of experience in agriculture and rural economic development. Harold advises startups and businesses on regulatory issues, operational process improvements, value chain and market opportunities, and barriers to growth while enabling better decision-making and improved competitiveness. He has also provided technical assistance to help entrepreneurs, enterprises, process, and market value-added farm products. Harold Stanislawski and panelists, welcome to Fields of Innovation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Harold Stanislawski, thank you, Dan, for the wonderful introduction of all the panelists and such. And I just want to say that I am here at the headquarters of Sproul Farms and 3 Farm Daughters here in the great state of North Dakota, Grand Forks. And it's a delight to be here today. And we'll quickly move into to tell you a little bit about AURI. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This will be a moderated panel with questions and answers at the end. So as you have questions for any of the speakers, feel free to put them into the portal on Q&A, and we will get to those toward the end of the program. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about, first off, who AURI is and some of the programming we do. We are a nonprofit corporation that was created by the Minnesota legislature to increase utilization of Minnesota's rich agricultural resources. And our mission, of course, is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added ag products. And we do that in 4 ways, by categorizing food, co-products, bio-based products, and renewable energy are the areas that we work in. And in doing so, we offer commercialization services, which is private on one-to-one projects, such as 3 Farm Daughters here, business, feasibility, hands-on technical assistance through our technical teams and our scientists that work for AURI. Also, the opportunity to provide entrepreneur and residence opportunities for lab equipment sharing at our labs in Waseca, Marshall, Crookston. We also offer public initiatives that are done and are free to the world. These could be science publications and so forth that would have universal utility for many, many people in our state and also our neighboring states. Applied R&D for the industry, and also offering ag innovation partnership to kind of catalyze the activity and get it moving within our state. And AURI Connects is industry convening. This program today is part of AURI Connects, and the public dissemination and research projects and reports is imperative to make sure that the information gets out to the people so it can be fully utilized and developed into commercialization opportunities. And of course, we offer a webinar Wednesday, Fields of Innovation, and so forth through AURI Connects. Next slide. So our guiding principles is to transform these agricultural products into sustainable businesses. And by providing affordable access to consumer and science and technical expertise and infrastructure, this is how it's done. So publications on our website, some of the partners you see on the screen today is just a small sampling of a lot of the folks that we've worked with as we develop the opportunities for market entry. Next slide. So to start off the program today, just a brief introduction. We're talking about wheat today, and we're talking about primarily the wheat product bread and how folks can take an advantage of wheat by understanding the breeding that's going on today with our researchers, and also understanding the processes of processing wheat into products that are more digestible, and folks can enjoy bread products a little bit easier in the microbiome. And oftentimes this is done by working with Minnesota wheat farmers. And wheat farmers have banded together years ago to form wheat research and promotion councils. These are institutions that work on advancing value-added agriculture from wheat, and also making wheat a viable crop in Minnesota in that regard. So with us today, I'm very happy to introduce Scott Swinson, who's chairman of the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council. I consider Scott a neighbor. He's in the next county south of mine. And Scott, I'm very happy that you're able to join us this afternoon to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotions Council's role in the project that we are about to hear on. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Harold. Yeah, as Dan mentioned, I've been farming since the mid-'80s. I came back and started farming with my dad. He was still operating the farm then. At that point, this farm was a wheat soybean operation. In fact, about 2/3 of the acres were wheat and 1/3 were soybeans. Currently now we're a wheat corn soybean operation. In the 90s, I guess, started getting into wheat as well as, into corn. as well as some neighbors. And I think some varieties that were being offered at that time fit our area well. And you could see the move from wheat soybean operations to wheat corn soybean operations. But I always saw the value of having a third crop in my rotation for a lot of reasons. And probably the primary one is just the soil health. Following wheat the next year, I always saw that soybeans did better than following corn. So I think in soil health terms, that's one reason why I've kept actively raising wheat. So I got involved with the wheat associations in the state. I was on the board of the Minnesota Association of Wheat Growers. That is a dues paying membership organization. They're able to use their money or their resources to lobby on behalf of Minnesota wheat growers in St. Paul and Washington, D.C. They partner with other wheat growing states to do advocate in D.C. Now I'm currently on the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council, Wheat Council, if you will. Our job is, like it says in our title, we look at research projects and we do promotion. On the research side, generally we do things as far as production research. We fund, a big part of our funding goes to Dr. Jim Anderson's wheat breeding program at the University of Minnesota. We also do things with fertility. We have on-farm research. We look at fertility timing things. We look at fungicide applications, growth regulators, wheat seeding rate trials, and currently, we've gotten into doing some work with cover crops in wheat stubble. And wheat gets taken off the last part of July or early August, generally. And that gives us a couple months of opportunity to raise this second, you might say, cover crop. And I've been doing that on my farm since 2012. Some years we get a really good catch and we get a good growth of cover crops. I've tried different cover crops. So experimenting with that, and not only the benefit of raising wheat in the rotation, I see a benefit on my farm of having a cover crop in the rotation also. So on the promotion side for the Minnesota Wheat Council, most of the promotion we do is through we partner with other wheat growing states and we fund the U.S. Wheat Associates. The U.S. Wheat Associates is able to take that money and leverage it with market access program funds and foreign market development funds from the federal government. And we operate overseas operations promoting U.S. wheat in different areas around the world. So we do quite a bit with the checkoff funds in terms of international promotion. The checkoff is a program where every bushel sold in the state of Minnesota, there's 2 cents taken off the price per bushel that the farmer receives, and that's the funds that we use to do our research and promotion. Well, approximately 4 or 5 years ago, we were approached by a farm family that farm near Crookston, Minnesota, but we're also starting a business called Backwind Foods. And they were looking at heritage wheats. These were older wheat varieties or ancient wheat varieties. He had acquired some seed and had grown it out to get more seed or more production. So they were using those varieties and also a new method, or an old method really, of baking bread, which is the fermentation method or sourdough method. And I know the presenters that are following me will talk more about that. So we funded some research through that for that family and their work in sourdough baking process. But it also sparked a little interest, I think, on the board of directors in saying, well, why don't we isolate it further? Can we look at varieties, the modern wheat varieties we raise versus ancient wheat varieties or even heritage wheat varieties? And we, through our work with Dr. Anderson at the University of Minnesota and with the help of Dr. George Honor, they have looked at quite a few varieties and trying to determine, is there something that we bred into the wheat varieties today that have changed the digestibility issues, or something that we've left out? And Dr. Honor is going to talk about that in his talk. So if we can find a difference, if there's an answer, we've been hit hard with I remember the early 2000s, the Atkins diet became popular, and you could see that the wheat consumption in the US dropped from that. And then later on, I think in 2011, the book, The Wheat Belly, came out. And that was another hit on the use of wheat for consumers in the US. So we've got work to do. We want to get to the bottom of this if we can. And then from there, it'll be our job to promote or educate consumers as to some of the results of this. And this is sort of a first step. So I'm interested in hearing the presenters following me. And with that, I guess, Harold, I'll just let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We'll get back to you a little later on in the program as we get to our questions and answers. But it's really exciting for me to introduce this research project with our chief researchers here called Breeding Wheat That's Easier to Eat, A New Future for an Old Crop, a Wheat Variety and Sourdough Product Analysis for Anti-Nutrient Levels Related to Digestibility. Digestibility, wheat sensitivity, celiac, all of this has been really high profile for the wheat industry for quite some time. This research that you are going to hear about in the next 15 minutes or so will shed light on what is being done in this regard. So I'm very pleased to announce and introduce Dr. George Honor from the Food Science Department at the University of Minnesota, who has worked very closely with Dr. James Anderson, the wheat breeder from Minnesota as well. And of course, their research team today to further discuss this project. So with that, Dr. Honor, take over.
All right, thank you very much, Harold. I'm George, as you've already been told, and I'm calling from Coban in Guatemala. I'm in the field somewhere doing some work, but I still wanted to be part of this, this call. So this project is on the backdrop of the fact that there have been a significant reduction of food consumption, as already indicated by Scott. Okay, next slide. So why the decline? We think some of the problems why the consumption of wheat is actually declining is due to the promotion of what we call fat diets, right? And this actually results in a significant portion of the population removing starches from their diet. And we all know cereals contain a lot of starch, at least about 60–65% starch. Another problem is the avoidance of gluten or wheat in total. Now, some of these fat diet examples are paleo diet, where people eliminate gluten altogether and just consume vegetables. We have the keto diet. This is where people eat high fat, low carbohydrate diet, and this puts your body into what we call ketosis, where you burn off fat to lose weight. And you also have Whole30, where people eat fruits and vegetables only for 30 days. There are other diets called the Mediterranean diet that I'm sure you know about. Next slide. So one of the main problems is gluten, right? And gluten has been instrumental in people avoiding the consumption of wheat altogether. Now, gluten is a protein not only in wheat, it's also in rye and barley. For some reason, wheat has always been the cereal or the grain that is taking the brand of the effect of gluten. Now, celiac disease is an immune disease in which people just cannot eat gluten because it causes damage to their small intestines. Now, if you look at the picture on the bottom right, you see how a normal intestine looks like, and then you see how the consumption of gluten actually damages the intestinal wall. The other thing is celiac disease is actually in less than 1% of the American population. So that's just around 3 million people, but it's still that 1 million people has been able to drive home the message that consumption of wheat is bad and you shouldn't eat it. And it's really affecting farmers and the wheat industry altogether. In addition to celiac disease, we also have wheat allergies, right? So wheat allergies is where people react to eating foods that contain wheat. And it is not necessarily from gluten, but we know that when these people stop eating wheat, they actually are able to recover from food allergies, from their wheat allergy. This is sometimes compared to celiac disease, but it's very different. So wheat allergy is normally when your body is producing antibodies in response to wheat proteins. And then you have the non-allergy, non-celiac wheat sensitivity, which is also kind of similar to the wheat allergy, though it is not really an allergy, but also people have issues when they eat wheat. And again, when they stop eating wheat, they tend to get a little bit better. So we have a problem. We have the celiac, wheat allergy, and then the NCWS. Okay, next slide. So we think that there's more to gluten causing this problem, right? So gluten has its own issue, celiac disease, but we think there is more to it, especially when you're looking at the NCWS. And a little bit of background search led us to what we call FODMAPs and ATIs. So FODMAP is an acronym for fermentable, oligo-di, monosaccharide, and polyols. So these are basically short chain sugars that is difficult for the body to digest. A good example of some of these FODMAPs are found in beans. When we eat beans, people become bloated and all that, they have all this discomfort. We find them in wheat as well, but not the same sugars that we find in wheat. We also have polyols, sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol. These are sugar alcohols. Again, the body cannot absorb them, so they still stay in your small intestines. They get through to your large intestines, and then they cause intestinal problems there. And then we have ATIs. ATIs are small molecular weight proteins that are found in wheat, not just in wheat, but in this case, we are talking about wheat. Now, this is not part of the gluten proteins. These are not gluten proteins, but again, they also cause a lot of problems for people when they consume wheat. So we decided to look at these two factors here and screen a lot of wheat varieties to figure out whether we have, for some reason, bred these compounds into the wheat that we call modern wheat now. Next slide. Now, a little bit of these FODMAPs levels that we find in food. They are normally present in small quantities, but it is normally tolerated by a lot of people, and especially people who have irritable bowel syndrome, when they consume less than 0.3 gram per serving. Now, what is per serving? Now, the per serving here in this study, the per serving they used was just 2 slices of bread, right? So if you eat 2 slices of bread that has more than 0.3 grams of these FODMAPs, you are likely to have problems. Now, if you look at the picture on your left bottom, you see that there are many other products that you find these FODMAPs in. Asparagus, melon, a lot of these, but if you go down to garlic, if you go down to onions, you find way more amount of these FODMAPs in onions. And I tell my students that one way to try to verify whether there is FODMAPs in onions is to eat one whole ball, cook one whole ball of onion, and just eat it and see how you become very bloated the next day. It's because you have these fructooligosaccharides that are fermented because your body cannot take them in. If you look at the picture on the top right, you see that when you come to cereals, brown rice, white rice, noodles from rice, pasta from quinoa, and gluten-free products they do not have any of these FODMAPs, or they have the levels that are below the 0.3 grams. The moment you move into wheat product, wheat pasta, whole wheat bread, wheat biscuit, then you start going into levels that can really cause a lot of discomfort because you go past that 0.3 grams per serving. Okay, next slide. So this actually led to the Minnesota Wheat Council, University of Minnesota, AURI, and Back Foods when coming together to try and tackle this issue of FODMAPs and ATIs in wheat, because we believe that if we are able to develop a wheat that is more digestible, it will result in an increase in demand, farmers will make money, the wheat industry will make money, and ultimately consumers would also be happy because they won't have all these issues related to the consumption of wheat. So we decided to tackle this issue head on. We put together a proposal, submitted it to the Minnesota Department of AGRI, and we were able to get funding for this project. So that is what I'm going to talk about in the course of time. Next slide. So the long-term goals of this project was to reduce the discomfort that consumers face when they consume wheat-based products. And we also want to improve the health of consumers in general, and of course, increase the profitability of wheat farmers. Wheat farmers are important to us, and everything that we do in the university that is related to wheat, Jim and I are always aimed at making sure wheat farmers make a lot more money. So next slide. So we had a few objectives. So one was to look at ancient wheat, heritage wheat, and modern wheat, and screen these different types of wheat to see whether there has been an increase in FODMAPs or an increase in ATI with during the breeding of these wheat varieties. We also wanted to see whether there was any general variability in these different kinds of wheat. So next. We also wanted to explore the use of fermentation, and this was important to us because while we, the researchers, were doing our best from the breeding angle, we also wanted to look at what the consumer can do at home. I mean, could you reduce these FODMAPs by fermenting your wheat into sourdough bread? So we were interested in looking at that. Next. And then, of course, working with AURI, we wanted to establish pathway for industry to implement the research outcomes. And I think this has been very, very successful. Next slide. Next. So this is what we did for the first part of the work where we're looking at screening. We screened about 220 Asian heritage and modern wheat varieties that were grown in Crookston and in St. Paul in 2019. Next slide. And we also determined genetic markers by extracting the DNA from these panel, because what we were interested in was also to see whether we can identify whether there are any genetic markers that are responsible for the production of these FODMAPs and ATI, so it can be used in during the breeding of wheat that is more digestible. Next slide. And then, so our whole grains, we got these wheat samples after they were grown, and they were analyzed for the FODMAPs and the ATI as well using HPLC. Next slide. And then we also did association mapping to, as I said, try to identify any genetic markers that are associated with these FODMAPs. This was very, very important to us. Next. So these are the classes of wheat that we actually planted and actually screened. So we had 46 lines of heritage wheat. We had a lot more of the modern wheat. This is after 1970. We put in some durum wheat to see how the levels of these ATIs and FODMAPs in them as well. We had Encorn, we have MS, and then some synthetic haploids. The pictures on your right actually are pictures of the wheat on the field. It is important to note that these were treated with, I think, pesticides as they would normally do for any wheat that they grow on the field. Next slide. Next. So the samples that we had showed this genetic diversity. So we were able to group these wheat varieties into bread wheat, into durums and synthetic haploids, and also into MS. So each of the spots that you see is actually a name of one of the varieties. You don't really have to see them, but what is important here is that there's a lot of genetic diversity within the varieties that we actually looked at, which I think was very interesting to us. Next slide. And this is also another way of looking at the varieties. So we're also able to classify them into the modern lines and also the heritage, or what we call founder lines. And then we have the what we call the Chinese, Mexican, or South American lines. So again, these two slides give us actually confirm that we have a lot of variability in the wheat samples. So we were very interested to see whether the levels of FODMAPs and ATI were also very variable in relation to what we saw from the genetic diversity. Next slide. So this slide here is actually the ATI and FODMAPs of about 167 common wheat varieties that we screened. Now on your x-axis, we have the FODMAPs, and you can notice that we have FODMAPs with excess fructose. So in calculating the FODMAPs, we had to calculate the FODMAPs with what we call excess fructose. We basically found that from subtracting the amount of glucose from the amount of fructose that we had in the sample. This was important because we know that if you have equal amount of fructose and glucose, you are then able to absorb the fructose. But when you have excess of the fructose in relation to the glucose, that is where you have an issue. Now, if you look at this x-axis, you can see there was a lot of variability in the FODMAPs that we actually analyzed for the samples. There are a few outliers here and there, but we were able to come up with a range of about 0.4% to about 1.2% in the wheat samples. The numbers may seem small, but it is still a huge variability. In terms of ATI, which is on the right axis, we have the same variability as well. So we're looking at about 1.8 to about 3.9%, with most of the samples concentrating in the middle. Now, the conclusion we get from this slide is that, yes, there exists a lot of variability. And for us, it is good news because we can be able to tease out samples that have low ATI and samples that have high ATI and try to find whether there is any genetic links to them. Next slide. And again, we've seen this already. I'm just showing this here to remind you of the fact that we have the ATIs and we have FODMAPs in all the wheat samples. And the values that we saw, even though they look very small, the 0.4 to 1.2%, you are likely to exceed that 0.3 grams per serving if we prepare bread from some of the wheat varieties that we analyzed. Next slide. This here is called the Manhattan plot, and this is basically trying to see whether there is any genetic association between whether there are any genetic markers associated with the FODMAPs and the ATI. Jim will be the best person to explain it, but my understanding is, so you can see on your y-axis, you have 1, 2, and 3. So the 3 is basically the level beyond which we have any statistical association with the chromosomes. So we have chromosomes on the x-axis. And you can see that we don't really have a lot of hits above the 3, which kind of was, I wouldn't say was surprising to us, but we were not happy. We thought we would see a lot more hits above the 3. What this is telling us is that there is not really like a very strong genetic association, or there's not really we were not really able to identify a lot of chromosomes that really have a very strong association with the FODMAPs that we determined. Now, having said that, we still see some hits up there. So there's still room for us to play around with the samples that we actually analyzed and still be able to breed for reducing the FODMAPs in wheat in general. Next slide. We see the same for ATI, and ATI, we got a little bit more hits, which was good. So if you can see there, you have a lot more of the points going beyond 3. So it means there's a lot more chromosomes that are actually associated with ATI that can allow the breeding program to actually go in and try and see whether we can breed out ATIs in wheat. Next slide. So after looking at our preliminary findings, we still call this preliminary findings because we are almost at the end of completing all the analysis, and we don't expect the results to change significantly. So these results will still hold. Now, we saw genetically diverse set of wheat lines that we analyzed, as I showed on the graphs earlier. We also saw wide differences in FODMAPs and ATI content, which, as I said, is good. The levels of ATI were from 1.8 to 3.9. And then for FODMAPs, we had 0.4 to 1.2. So you had really some wheat varieties that had very, very low amount of FODMAPs. And we saw that the N-corns, the N-corns had low amount of ATIs and also FODMAPs. And then the MS actually had low amount of FODMAPs. So that can tell us that at least we can start concentrating on the MS if we are looking at breeding for wheat varieties that have low FODMAPs. Next slide. And we also found that there were correlations between, so these samples were harvested or were grown and harvested from Crookston and St. Paul because we wanted to see whether there were any variability in these parameters with regards to the location. And we saw that, yes, there were correlations between the two locations. We had the first set of samples that we analyzed were grown in 2019. We had another set that were analyzed that were grown in 2020. And we saw that, yeah, depending on the location, you can have some differences in the amount of FODMAPs. But within each of the location, we didn't see a lot of a correlation within. If you look at St. Paul or if you look at Crookston, they were very low. But if you look at comparing the two, we saw that, yeah, there were some correlations. So yes, where you grow the crop also has an effect on the levels of these FODMAPs and ATI as well. Next slide. So we did not identify, there were no identifiable patterns with regards to FODMAPs and ATI concentration, looking at the year of release among common wheat varieties. What this means is that we actually did not see, we actually did not find any proof that we have bred. If we look at the ancient heritage and modern wheat, we did not find any proof that we have actually bred or the breeding that has been done over the years has actually increased ATI or increased FODMAPs. They virtually remain the same, which is good. So we have not artificially increased these levels. We also did not find, there was no genetic region that is responsible for a large portion of the genetic variations for some of these traits. But as I said, they can still be played with. They can still be looked at in selecting certain varieties that have low FODMAPs and low ATI. Next slide. The second part is a fermentation study. I'll try and run through very quick because of time. Next slide. So here we prepared sourdough, looking at doing type 1 sourdough to see whether they will reduce FODMAPs and ATI. And what we decided to do was to select low samples with low, medium, and high FODMAPs and ATI to see their effect. Next slide. So this is a picture that, and this was done by Brian from Backward Foods. He did a very good job at this. This is a picture of the ingredients that are needed for sourdough bread. You have your wheat, you have your, of course, your starter culture, and that gives you that fermented sourdough bread. Next slide. So we took 10 varieties. We prepared type 1 sourdough. and the fermentation was done. We fermented them at 4 and 12 hours. The idea here was to see whether the time of fermentation had any effect on the reduction of ATIs and also the FODMAPs. Next slide. So these are the ingredients that were used by Brian. He has his flour, he has his active culture, mixes them together, ferments it to get the dough. So I got these doughs in my lab. They were freeze dried, and then they were analyzed for ATIs and FODMAPs. Next slide. So I got about 600 samples, which is a lot. We are trying to see how we can select some of the samples to actually analyze because of time, such that it won't significantly change the conclusion that we'll get from the study. Next slide. So we have some preliminary results for the ATI, and we're still analyzing for the FODMAPs, but you can see here that 4 hours of fermentation reduces the amount of ATI by as much as about 36%, which is significant, right? And as you go ahead to do the fermentation for 12 hours, it's not 8 shots, 12 hours, it even goes down the more. But I think the significant reduction is coming from the first 4 hours. So just 4 hours, you reduce your ATF from about 2.6% to about 2.61% to about 1.67%. This was surprising to me because I wasn't expecting that of a decrease in the ATI. I was expecting a decrease in FODMAPs. We are analyzing that. We haven't finished that yet, but this is really very impressive. So at least the consumer can do something at home to make their wheat samples or their wheat product a lot more digestible by just fermenting these samples. Next slide. Now, this research wouldn't have been possible without a few people. We have Emily, we have Susan, we have Nate, we have my PhD student Prince, and we have my researcher Ebilola, who has been working very hard to screen all these samples. And this research would have been possible without funding from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We are very grateful for the support, and we'll continue to do our best to see what we find in the future. Next. So I'll hand over back to Harold, and then you can take over there.
Thank you, George, for that great presentation. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Grace, Molly, and Paul Sproul with 3 Farm Daughters, and I'm just going to turn it directly over to them so they can just get into their presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you for having us. We're very excited to be here. I'm Molly, I'm the middle daughter.
I'm Grace, I'm the youngest daughter.
And I'm Paul, the father.
Annie couldn't be with us here today, but we're happy to be here. So just to kind of give you a quick overview of really where we actually started. And it starts way before our company, 3 Farm Daughters. It actually starts about 30 years ago when our parents started Sproul Farms, which is our family farm here based in the Red River Valley. So we're out of Grand Forks, North Dakota. And they started their first generation farm in 1993. And today we grow an array of different crops such as wheat, durum, and rye. We grow corn, soybeans, edible beans, sugar beets, potatoes, and hemp. And so growing up, we've all been involved in the farm. It's been very instrumental in our lives. And then as we all kind of went away to school, we came back and have all been involved in the farm since then. And so really what we do in our farm is we kind of pride ourselves on being early adapters in innovative practices and trying to look for what the market is telling us and where it's going. And with that, about 3 years ago, Paul had actually read an article about different wheat varieties and having different nutritional values, such as lower gluten, high resistant starch values. And that kind of sparked an idea in our mind, is like, how can we grow this? And from there, we inquired, and our farm started growing those varieties here in Grand Forks, in the Grand Forks area for the last 3 years now. And really that is what has kind of led into, branched into 3 Farm Daughters, is wanting, we see it on the egg side and growing, and but as traditional farmers, you take your wheat to the mill and you kind of like leave it there and you kind of walk away at that point. But we wanted to see it come full circle and really bring it full circle. And that's where we decided to start, you know, as sisters and our parents' support and everything, we really decided to bring it full circle and start our company, Three Farm Daughters.
So we're a majority female owned, agricultural based, better for you food company. We like to say that when we started Three Farm Daughters, what we wanted was good and healthy food as moms, wives, sisters, and farmers. We really wanted to be that friend in the food business for people as they were shopping. As moms ourselves, we used to always go down the grocery store aisles and look for foods that met our criteria, that felt really good for us, that were nourishing to us and for our families. And then as a mom, you have a lot less time to stop and flip the package around, look at the ingredient legend, and make sure it fits that criteria. So when we launched Three Farm Daughters, we wanted it to be that kind of company that once you knew who we were, as you would scroll through the aisles or find us online, you would know, I know them, I trust them, I want to put their product in my cart. So we really wanted to get to know our consumers, and we have since launched. We've been connecting with our consumers over social media, which has been an amazing platform to get direct feedback straight from the person that is ordering and consuming. So we have really been loving that. And then our mission here at the bottom is offering healthier pantry staples we know and love without compromising on taste, texture, performance. Oh, and without swapping for alternatives. Now that gets us and our kids excited. And our kids are definitely our harshest critics. We love having them in the kitchen with us. You know, you feel like the kitchen is the heart of the home. So we are really, really passionate about wheat. We have been growing it, like Molly said, on our farm for a long time. And as we went through our Brennan experience, we really dug deep in what it means to consume wheat. So years ago, wheat, of course, even today still is one of the major calorie intake foods that all of us consume every single day. And so wheat went from friend to frenemy during sort of that era of different diets. And now wheat's making a comeback again. And so we are really, really excited and thrilled to be part of the comeback, offering better wheat varieties to our consumers. So
yeah, I think just kind of to piggyback on Grace there, it really adds to like the research that, you know, George spoke to, and what AURI is, everyone is doing is like, you know, everyone loves wheat, and you just like, there is not the replacement there. And so just making it the better nutritional and, you know, able to be consumed by more people if, you know, they do have that sensitivity or thing like that nature is really what's we get excited about. Because as Grace spoke, it really like rings true to us with the farm. You know, like we grew up in the wheat fields and things of that nature. And so it's kind of fun to see.
That kind of leads us to our consumer feedback, actually, and we can hop to the next slide. So when we launched Three Farm Daughters, what we wanted was an open and transparent purchasing experience for our consumers. And so we reflect that back as sisters as well. So these are 3 blurbs of reviews that we've gotten direct from our consumers. And obviously there's a lot of text. People kind of bolded them. Yeah, we bolded a few things that have rang true. The bottom one though is one of my favorites. A lady said, "Ladies, as a long-term diabetic, I ordered your pasta with skepticism. Every single pasta I've ever tried has spiked my blood sugar and caused massive highs, even the lower carb ones. And I saw your ad on Facebook, read your story, and was really impressed. I decided to give it a try. After 10 years of hardly eating pasta at all, your pasta is a revelation. The texture, the taste, amazing. But the miracle, totally normal blood sugar." So there's a little bit more to that, but it's really, really encouraging for us as sisters to get feedback like this in reviews that people are really, really enjoying the product and giving it a try. It's obviously a lot different, and one of the first things to the market to be high fiber and to have different nutritional panel than a lot of pastas that are just wheat. So it's really exciting and encouraging, and the AURI Future is Bright is definitely ringing true for us as we continue to develop and set our sights for more for Three Farm Daughters.
Yeah. And just kind of to end on that note, I would like to read the middle one because I think this is super exciting for like which Grace spoke to, like the friend, the frenemy, back to the friend again.
Yeah.
And so it says, "We replaced our bonza pasta, which is a chickpea pasta, with Three Farm Daughters, and my husband and I absolutely love this pasta. We were using bonza for the protein and the fiber since I'm gluten sensitive. He's not crazy about the texture. We tried this and he loves it, and it does not bother me if I eat it in small portions." So it's really bringing it back to the friend again. And that's what we're super excited about. So with that, we'll kind of hand it back over to Harold.
You know, I feel we almost need a round of applause. Just a great presentation by Molly and Grace. And now we'll enter the moderated discussion question and answer session. And there were a couple of questions that came in. And I think the first one might go to George. And it's how long does reducing FODMAPs change the flavor of the wheat product?
Thank you for that. We haven't looked into that yet, but we don't think it should reduce the flavor of the wheat. The FODMAPs are actually, most of the flavor that we get from wheat would be coming from the fermentable sugars. So if you look at it, you may be reducing the flavor of the bread when you bake it, because then some of these sugars are actually involved in the development of the Maillard reactions and the browning and all the flavor involved. So it probably may affect it, but we don't know for now. It's something we can look into.
Thank you, George. Another question here, and this one, Scott, might be for you. It's how long will it take to develop a variety with desired FODMAP and ATI characteristics that will go all the way?
That's a good question. Maybe better for George, but it's probably, I would guess 5 years, 10 years, somewhere. Or
well, Jim always tells me breeding for a new variety will take at least 5 to 10 years. But this is still a very good initial step. We're hoping to finish this work as soon as possible in the next few months. So that would actually give Jim the ability to start looking into developing a new variety. But getting a new variety, from what I've heard from Jim, can take 5 to 10 years.
All right, thanks. I got a question here for both Molly and Grace. And as they've been in the marketplace, what are you hearing from consumers in terms of increased demand? What do you feel like the demand for wheat products with the kinds of characteristics that we learned about today on this program might bring to increased market share?
Absolutely. So what we've found so far with our pasta especially is that people are almost right away skeptical, like, how is this wheat? How does it taste like regular pasta? And then they purchase and say, I can't believe it. It cooks really uniquely. It's just like regular pasta. Their kids love it. And it's been honestly really, really encouraging. And so once we can get that first trial purchase, people always seem to come back with feedback that they've loved it. Their kids loved it. They can't believe that they can make one big pot and feed the whole family.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that, I think one of the things that we've really kind of like the new, not like the new trend, but a consumer trend is clean labels. Everyone wants to know the clean label. So you can get a pasta that's high in fiber and more protein, but you're adding something to it. It's more than just the wheat itself. And so by being able to offer that clean label coincide with the better nutrition is what's really encouraging and what the consumers are really liking.
Mm-hmm. Another feedback that we've gotten consistently too is people can't believe that they don't get that gut distension after they consume it. People will say, oh, I actually had it 3 nights in a row for dinner and I don't feel like I have a brick in my belly. So what could you love more than having pasta 3 nights a week?
Well, thank you so much, Grace, Molly, for that. I got something that the rest of the participants didn't get. I actually got some pasta here at Sproul Farms and 3 Farm Daughters here, so, and it really is fantastic. The future is bright, folks. As we look at what's next in terms of moving this industry forward, the research results will benefit the value chain, the wheat industry and consumers. And research is providing important info about the functionality of wheat as it relates to digestibility. And the research also is important to people who have had to opt out of eating wheat due to these adverse reactions. And we want that to change. People have just been gluten sensitive with some of the product that is soon to come on the market and already is on the market with sourdough fermentation and such as an answer. So thanks to innovative science and technology from folks and our partners like the University of Minnesota and George's work and Dr. James Anderson's work and the help of the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council. These are all great, but it doesn't get us to the end game unless we've got good marketers in this business like Three Farm Daughters and many others like them that can get these products to consumers for them to taste, enjoy, and all of the rest. So this is a very, very great effort. And I just want to take 1 minute here to talk about what's next on phase 2 research. This will be a continuation of what you've seen here today, where selection of wheat varieties from phase 1 with low FODMAP and ATI and will be bred for high amylose and resistant starch. That will be going forward. We'll investigate the expected glycemic index and characteristics of pasta and bread made from low ATI and FODMAP wheats with high amylose and resistant starch again, and then determine how the consumption of this pasta and bread will affect the gut microbiome and establish a pathway, of course, in the end to implement the research outcomes. So much of this information, of course, can be found on AURI.org. And again, I want to thank the Minnesota Department of Agriculture for their support of this work. It's critical, and it's going to help a lot of wheat farmers in the Valley. So I think with that, I want to sign off and turn it over back to Dan Scogan.
All right, Harold, thanks so much. And thank everyone who participated in our presentation today. Very interesting and looking forward to that bright future. That does conclude AURI Connects Fields of Innovation for today, presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. Our next AURI Connects Fields of Innovation is going live. Summer is here and Fields of Innovation is heading outside. Join us in person on Saturday, July 17th at Rocori High School in Cold Spring, Minnesota, as we take part in the Rocori FFA's Kernza Field Day. The event will feature presentations on the development of Kernza perennial grain, highlight its environmental benefits, and provide demonstrations of its uses as an ingredient in food products. Samples of Kernza-based foods will be available along with hands-on activities for kids of all ages. There's also going to be public tours of local Kernza fields and discussions with regional egg producers, university scientists, and conservation experts on how Kernza can benefit the food and egg industry. The event will start at 9:30 that morning and will run until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we hope to see you there. And of course, we always welcome your feedback on our program, so please respond when we send you that evaluation. Thank you for participating today, and remember to visit the Fields of Innovation Facebook page. For more information on Fields of Innovation or any of the work that AURI is involved in, you can go to auri.org.